Good afternoon, listeners, and welcome to the very first episode of Echoes of the Guilty, where we dive headfirst into the most insane serial killers and cases in the world. I'm your host, Lily, and today we are diving into Billy the Axeman, a man who is said to have committed a minimum of 8 murders around the US. But as you'll soon see, that number might just be the tip of the blood-soaked iceberg. This isn't just a story about a serial killer. This is a twisted puzzle about a man who managed to travel undetected for over a decade by train, leaving so many families slaughtered in his wake. But before we dive in, I do want to warn you all that this episode will be talking briefly about sexual assault, so if you do believe that it will trigger you, please stop listening now. But now that I have the bigger, more important things out of the way, let's begin with what people back then called the Midwest Murders, which was a string of brutal murders between 1911 and 1912. All of these murders took place in small and quiet towns across Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Illinois, Kansas, and Iowa. The first murder occurred in Ardenwald, Oregon, where a family of 4 lived a relatively normal life. But it all took a turn for the worst on June 9th, 1911. The Hill family, William, Ruth, and their 2 children, Philip and Dorothy, were brutally murdered in their sleep. Their skulls were crushed with the blunt end of an axe, and then the killer moved their bodies, covered them with sheets, and disturbingly covered every window, and authorities say that it was his attempt to quote-unquote hide the horrors from within. And during the autopsy, the mother and daughter both showed signs of post-mortem sexual assault. And what threw everyone off even more was the fact that there were absolutely no valuables taken. So this was absolutely, not a robbery. This was very much something so much darker. There was absolutely nothing for the next month, up until July 9th, 1911, in Rainier, Washington. Just 1 month after the Hill family murder, Archie and Nettie Cobble were attacked in the same fashion. Axe, in the middle of the night, the woman was assaulted, bodies were covered with sheets after being moved, and again, absolutely no sign of robbery. Locals started whispering, was this connected to the Hill family murders that happened a month prior? And it's like, at this point in my research, I'm like, okay, this is weird, because it's like, these 2 cases have extremely similar MO. Like, axe to the head, middle of the night, the assault of the women of the house, their bodies being covered, things like that. And for, your stereotypical serial killer, it's like, he'll attack within, a few days, depending on the severity and the motives and everything like that. But in the amount of time that it would take a stereotypical serial killer to commit a crime, it took this guy to travel from one state to the next. So it's like, okay, what is actually going on here? But, continuing on, this killer took a 3-month break until he targeted 2 families of 3 in Colorado Springs, Colorado on September 17th. The 2 families were the Burnhams and the Waynes. They both traveled to Colorado Springs to go to the sanatorium to try to avoid the tuberculosis outbreak, and they were both murdered next door to each other. Mary Burnham had her children, and Henry and Blanche Wayne had their 18-month-old baby Lula. Both families were killed in their sleep, again with the blunt end of an axe, bodies being moved, windows and faces being covered, no signs of robbery. So obviously there was a growing fear around the country that they might have been next. Initially, authorities suspected the father of the Burnham kids may have committed the murders, but that quickly faded as they realized that he had come down with tuberculosis and had not left the sanatorium. And then initially people thought that there may have been several murderers because they were all so far apart from each other, but they realized that it either had to be the same person from the previous murders or a copycat due to the amount of similarities in all of the murders. Later on in the investigation, it was made aware to authorities that the houses were really close to a railway, which made them believe that that was how the killer was able to disappear without a single trace after each of the murders. In less than 2 weeks after the Burnham Wade murders, another family of three was murdered in Monmouth, Illinois on September 30th. The Dawson family, which was William, his wife, and their 12-year-old daughter, Georgia, were found in their house with their skulls crushed, and later on it was found that a metal gas pipe was used. The next day, the family was found by the members of the First United Presbyterian Church when they were suspicious of why William didn't show for his janitorial shift. And a few weeks later, near the house, a flashlight was found, and it was engraved with Colorado Springs, September 4th, 1911. And more of the pieces were connecting. The authorities did make a note, however, of the deviation from the usual MO. In all of the other cases, a axe from each family was used, but this time it was a metal gas pipe, which was found at the intersection of two railways. And this is when it really hit that it was probably just a single person traveling and committing the murders, but it was like, what is the change? Like, did this family not own an axe? Or, like, really, what was the change? About 2 to 3 weeks after the Dawson family murder happened, a family of five was targeted on October 16th in Ellsworth, Kansas. The Shulman family, which was William and Pauline, and their three kids, Lester, Fern, and Fenton, were all slaughtered. The windows were covered once again, but something new was that Pauline Shulman's body was posed provocatively, which was completely different from the usual, sexual motive. And it was believed that the killer may have assaulted her after posing her. In the morning following the murder, someone tried to break into a nearby home of the city marshal, Morris Merritt, potentially being the killer still lingering and trying to find his next target. And once again, similar to the Illinois murder, authorities did bring out bloodhounds to find a scent trail of the killer, and it led them to the intersection of two railways where it then went dead. And then there was just a break. The killer vanished for over 8 months. And then he popped back up in Paula, Kansas on June 5th, 1912. A couple, Rollin and Anna Hudson, were found bludgeoned. Same method, with being hit to the head with the blunt end of an axe, bodies being moved and covered, and nothing stolen. And one notable thing about this murder was that the screen was pried off. And hours post murders, somebody had tried to break into another home, the Longmire's house, and upon hearing glass breaking, Mrs. Longmire awoke, and upon being discovered, the person ran. And people really believed that the killer was back. And now for the most infamous case of them all. June 9th, 1912. Literally a year after the very first case in Oregon, was the Villisca axe murder in Villisca, Iowa. A family of 8, Josiah and Sarah Moore, their 4 kids, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, with their 2 young guests, Lena and Ina Stillinger, all brutally murdered. 7 of them were struck with the blunt end of an axe, but Josiah, his face was obliterated with the sharp end, which indicated that there may have been a personal motive within this. And once again, bodies were covered, windows were covered, and even weirder, mirrors were covered too. And Lena Stillinger, this 11, maybe 12-year-old little girl, was posed the exact same way as Pauline Shulman, suggesting that there may just maybe, was a sexual motive. And one more time, the authorities did bring out the bloodhounds, but lost the scent at the intersection of two railways. Altogether, there were 8 white families, which make a note of that. White families, and then 31 dead. Every murder was near a railway, and every scene shared very eerily similar things. But did you think that was all? Obviously not. While the Midwest murders were happening, another wave of murders did happen down in Texas and Louisiana. They were called the Mulatto Axe murders, and these attacks claimed 49 lives across 13 black and mixed race families. The MO matched the Midwest murders: blunt force trauma, nighttime attacks, no robbery, and all near railways. But obviously, there were differences, being, the races of the victims, the number of casualties, and some did believe that it could have been the same killer, but others did argue that it was a copycat. And author Todd Elliott proposed to the former, claiming timelines filled in the gaps between Midwest murders, but still, nobody was ever caught. And then, in came a new theory. In 2017, Bill James and his daughter Rachel McCarthy James published a groundbreaking book called The Man on the Train. It began with Villisca, but their research did lead to a shocking discovery of over 24 similar murders dating back to 1898. And they did suspect that it could have been the same person. Between the years 1900 and 1910, the Jameses did identify 11 solid cases and 13 more that were highly probable. From 1906 to 1909, the murders did stop though, and they did think that it could have been the killer being imprisoned for a different crime. And when charting the locations, timelines, and MO, the pattern was honestly undeniable. So the real question is, who was it? Obviously, nobody really knew, but the Jameses did believe that it was a guy named Paul Mueller, German immigrant and former military man. A carpenter and a lumberjack, which, explains the skills with an axe. He was short, strong, and quiet. And their research revealed a disturbing possibility. Mueller may have also been responsible for the Hinterkaifeck murders in Germany in 1922, where an entire family was slaughtered and some were even stacked in a barn. And the killer stayed in the house for days afterwards, feeding livestock and eating the victim's food, and it had all the hallmarks of this guy that they called Billy the Axeman. And they were like, well, if Mueller was the man behind all of this, he could literally be America's most prolific serial killer, with the possibility of over 100 victims across the US and Europe. But yet there were no arrests, no convictions, just trails of blood and whispers on the tracks. That is it for today's deep dive into the twisted, terrifying story of Billy the Axeman. Was he a lone drifter riding the rails with a hunger for blood? Or could there have been multiple monsters hiding behind the same mask? We honestly may never know. I'm Willie, and this has been Echoes of the Guilty. Stay safe, lock your windows, and never ignore the sound of footsteps in the dark.